Hey Wargamers, Doug here with 2 Plus Stuff, and time for a video that I am very excited to make. So unless you've been living under a rock, the last 2 days our little hobby community online has been flooded with awesome pictures of all kinds of models. Basically there was a leak that kind of spoiled some things that were going to come out this Saturday for the big reveal show, which I will be doing with people. So I will have my thoughts on the review show, but I want to talk about the models that we know about. There are some new Lumineth. So if you don't know, the Lumineth, they focus on different aspects of culture, and we're seeing kind of the next thing of their aspects coming out. But what I want to talk about in this video is some vampires. Now, I did a video dedicated to the Soulblight, which is sort of the Games Workshop, copyrightable name for their vampirism in the mortal realms. I did a video for that, but honestly, at the end of it, the conclusion that I came to is that there just wasn't a ton of information in there. In fact, the only information we really had for quite some time was from the Legions of Nagash Battletome, which dedicated like a couple paragraphs. Like honestly, it wasn't really a full entry. But where no Battletome kind of had the baseline information for us, a lot of the Black Library novels have done a great job of giving us a sense of what it is like to be a Soulblight vampire in the mortal realms. And so in this video, we're just going to chat about 3 books that I picked out, as well as a couple of short stories of things that you can read if you're excited, like I am, for Soulblight, to kind of get you pumped, right? Get your blood pumping so that a vampire can come and drain it out of your body. And before anybody asks, of course, I'm going to do an entire lore week dedicated to Soulblight. It's a faction that I am personally extremely interested in because it's the only kind of death army, at least, thematically, that really appeals to me. And so, as long as they drop some kind of new thrall or zombie unit or something, some kind of equivalent, I'm in like Flynn. Now, the first book that I'm going to recommend to you is actually Dominion of Bones by David Annandale. It's actually one of the books that was actually suggested to me by a viewer. They put it in the comments. I was talking something about some corner of Shyish, and they're like, oh, you should really read this. And I gotta say, it's freaking cool. I actually got the audiobook version down from Audible, and it just does a really great job of painting the different characters out with different voice acting and things like that. But essentially what the conflict in the book is that there is a brewing war between Neferata, who's a lot of the Soulblight stuff that does exist really does focus around her, like almost exclusively. So we have Neferata on one side, and her kingdom is being invaded and savaged and kind of racked by a Khorne kingdom over here. And the Khorne character is actually fantastic because he's smart enough to understand, like, if we want to win a long, protracted war, we need like industry and society. And so it's this very unique kingdom of his. I believe he's actually from Hysh, so he has that enlightenment to kind of see what needs to be done, even through all the bloody haze and that kind of stuff. And so in that book, we actually follow quite a few vampire or Soulblight characters as they're kind of fulfilling the will of Neferata. They're infiltrating this city, and kind of the conflict of the book is that these two are like at the precipice of disaster, about to just go at each other. But nobody wants to kind of show their hand as far as how strong they actually are. So you get to see some of, my point in saying this is you get to see some of the really cool things that make sort of the like austere, noble, that kind of stuff for vampires, where it's like they're kind of politicking about how are we going to do this? How can we engage the enemy and trick them into showing their hands so that we can strike decisively? There's a lot of that little like subterfuge and subtlety going on in the book. And then of course, basically what happens in it is then Stormcasts come down. And so it's this reaction, right? It's 3 great forces, 3 great armies, all trying to react. And so while the book is centered around this conflict that is essentially like death factions versus chaos and order, what it does is it really just highlights Neferata specifically as being Queen of Soulblight essentially right now in Age of Sigmar, and how she conducts herself in warfare. It's got a 4.2 out of 5 on Goodreads and like an almost 5 on Audible. It really is a very entertaining book. Just the right amount of character development for me, and then also just like a snapshot into what's happening places in the mortal realms, right? This is a whole region of a map, and it's a huge hunk of land. It's not something as small as like a city siege or anything like that, but the fact that we're taking this great snapshot of this awesome moment in history where there's a super smart, enlightened Khorne army, you got Neferata, you got Stormcat, it's all just really cool. I highly suggest check it out. But what if we don't want to take a look at all of, Soulblight society, or at least specifically Neferata's version of it? Well, there actually isn't a whole lot of full-length novels that cover Soulblight characters at the moment. There are many that include Manfred, and those were back from like the Realmgate War stuff, which I will say the Realmgate War books have aged gracefully, but the second one I want to throw up here is actually Spear of Shadows. And this is a book I've recommended quite a few times, where it essentially is Grugny, I always get his name wrong. Grugny and Grimnir, I always swap the names, but Grugny puts out a quest of like reclaiming an incredibly powerful artifact to a group of heroes. And so what we learn throughout that book is as they are pursuing to reclaim this artifact, there's also a vampire doing the same thing. And so maybe not so much of like from their perspective about being Soulblight, but what you're seeing is normal people of the realm and how they act as the main characters of the book next to a great negative, like in terms of like a negative image, is like you get to see how the vampire reacts and does things and infiltrates and gets into places and uses all kinds of cool abilities to spy and infiltrate and all these kinds of things. So again, it's not obviously a pure Soulblight novel, but it does feature a strong Soulblight presence. And then they just do a bunch of really cool stuff. So if you're just looking to get excited, it's like a really cool book. And for my last pick here, as far as novels go, anytime I talk about death, I can't help but talk about Nagash, Undying King. It is my absolute favorite novel book put out by Black Library. It really is quite a bit of fun. Neferata does feature very prevalently in it. Again, Neferata has kind of become synonymous with Soulblight over the last few, I would say probably 2 to 3 years in terms of stuff they've written, where her and her court below her really do exemplify, vampirism in the realm. Specifically, Manfred has a conquering army and he is a vampire, but there's not a whole lot of him fostering, this community of nobility and spies and all this kinds of stuff with his own kind. But Nagash Undying King does focus quite a bit on Neferata and her actions to keep Nagash safe until he can rise again. Obviously, this book is set a bit in the past now as of recent events, but it is an incredibly cool read with an ending that made me jump out of my seat. I absolutely loved it. So I do recommend that one, specifically if you're trying to get your head around how death as a faction works. There are no Stormcast in there. It's just death factions. There's humans who live in Shyish and worship Nagash, and they're good people. They're not evil at all. And there's just it kind of gives you a full picture of what Shyish and therefore its citizens can be like and how they react differently as humans and Soulblight. And you got skeletons on one side, you got zombies over here, all these kinds of things. So I really do love this book, and I highly recommend it. Even if you're kind of just mildly Soulblight curious and you're you just want a good book, there you go, Nagash Undying King. But in addition to these novels, I do have a honorable mention here in the form of short stories. Now, like I said, we don't have a ton of stuff that's pure Soulblight 100%. Those characters are coming out hopefully with this Battletome. But what we do have is a whole bunch of really cool short stories that feature Neferata and then that kind of lower rung of vampires that she kind of corrals. So to kind of give you a sense of how many there are, I got 3 here by name. The Dance of Skulls, Auction of Blood, and Obsidian are all there for you to learn more about Neferata, her court. And when I say court, I mean obviously the vampires and nobles below her that are all shifting and vying for power in an eternal game of chess, basically. Politics and chess. And so those are 3 short stories you should really check out. Now, just speaking plain here, as far as I go, I wasn't able to make a video with my thoughts, like a live stream type thing, but I wanted to chat about it just for a little bit as we close this one out. You see, for me, Soulblight is a faction that I'm incredibly interested in because narratively, I love writing backgrounds and stuff like that for heroes, but I don't want to do it for every unit. And there's nothing that quite exemplifies heroes in the same way as you have these, relatively few vampires who lead massive undead armies. All of the character, all of the emotion is centered around those leaders, and the followers honestly don't quite matter because they most likely just corpses that have been resurrected. So I like that quite a bit for lore writing purposes and how vampires change and stuff in the realms. This is going to be something I'm very excited to see. A few things that come across my mind when I consider the idea of a full Soulblight faction is one, what's the battle line? If we're talking skellies and zombies, I want one of them. You know what I mean? If they make zombies, like I said, I'm all in. I'm just gonna sell everything and one of my kidneys and I'm all in. If they tie up loose ends as far as, you know, how Soulblight fit into the greater picture of Legions of Nagash, I would absolutely love that. And I'd even love to see a bunch of stories, like the little, like the lore blurbs you get, like to kind of pick out stories over time. I want them to really put this faction in the context of Age of Sigmar. So for example, one of my favorite characters I did a video on was Astria Soulbright. She's a character from the Stormcast Eternals Battletome, and she is part of the Sacrosanct Chamber. Her whole mission, just like everybody else in the Sacrosanct Chamber, is to cure the flaw, right? What is true immortality, not the kind of, you know, paper mache style that Sigmar put together to jerry-rig his new army of Stormcast, where they all come out defective every time they die. So she wants like true immortality, and so she studies vampires. Like Soulblight keeps coming up again and again and again in her research. And so I want like some interaction there, whether it's a short story that involves her or, you know, a lore blurb, like I said earlier from the book. I just want something that kind of makes them feel like they've always been there. They're being researched. You know, like I said, just put them in the context, make them feel like they're characters in a very vibrant world. They've been doing that pretty well lately with the Battletomes, I have to say. I think the Sons of Behemoth, they did an excellent job. That was probably my favorite book they've done recently that did a good job of making the characters fit in the world, and I want nothing less from this one. So anyway, friends, those are my thoughts. A few suggestions to get you started so you can be reading up while the Battletome is, you know, formally announced and then followed up after the pre-orders and that kind of stuff. Whenever it gets released to us. So go ahead, get reading. If you'd like to support the channel, and I'm just going to throw this out there, there is a link in the description down below to Audible, and if you hop on there and grab a book, you get one free, and then some of those proceeds go to help support the channel, and it doesn't cost you a thing. So if that interests you, go ahead and check them out. There's a whole bunch of, like I said, the short stories and the novels, they're all there. And yeah, I want to hear your thoughts. What are you excited for when it comes to Soulblight? What kind of army do you want to make? And when do we get new zombies? That's my question. Anyway, I'll catch y'all in the comments later. Happy wargaming. Hey everybody, I hope you enjoyed that video. It was made possible by the folks over here to the left. These are my top supporters over here on YouTube and on Patreon that keep this channel going. If you'd like to learn more about how to become a supporter and get some cool things in the process, like exclusive pictures and interactions with me and get your questions answered here on the channel, go ahead and click any of the links down below or the join button on the community page over on YouTube. Regardless of your choice, I wanted to thank you so much for joining me with this video, and I look forward to seeing you in my next one. Happy wargaming.